Okay, yeah, George, thanks for your introduction, Crystal, and we're excited to have you on the discussion. Now let's meet George. George, what's your role there at Tall Oaks, and tell us a little bit about the community.
So my name is George Winters. I'm the executive director here at Tall Oaks. I've been here for over 4 years now. Tall Oaks is a locally owned and operated community here in Reston, Virginia. We've been serving seniors in this area since 1987, which is a remarkable feat. We've been blessed to have the family owners who are actually with us today, not in this room, but they're here visiting this afternoon. And we've been able to provide a lot of unique and specific services to residents with assisted living needs, and also with our memory care residents as well. I mean, it would be hard to say that there's not anyone on this call or on this program today that hasn't had or hasn't known somebody who's been impacted by Alzheimer's. So we're delighted to be partnering with Ms. Anna Nelson and Steve. We always thank you for your support, and please enjoy the program. And if you need anything, let us know, and we're here to help.
Great. And we've got a couple of door prizes, folks. This is one of the benefits of partnering. So I'm going to bring up the wheel of names here, and we're going to spin once here before we meet Anna, and then we're going to spin at the end. So you got 2 chances to win today. So George and Crystal, raise your hand and give this a little, and there is one of the door prizes. This is awesome. Okay. So I'm going to give it a little spin, and let's see who our first winner is. And it's Sheila Griffith, Sheila Griffith. And I will make sure to get the email for Sheila to you there, and we can make sure that she gets that wonderful door prize. Now, before we meet Anna, fun fact, 1987 is when Tall Oaks was built in Reston, Virginia. I happen to be a 1983 graduate of South Lakes High School, which is in Reston, Virginia. So me and my family remember driving down Wheelie Avenue and seeing the construction there. It's kind of scary given how built up Reston is now, and that your neighborhood is just finishing up a wonderful new construction project. It's beautiful there. Okay. Well, with that, let's welcome Anna. Anna, there you go, Anna. Anna, again, thanks to the Tall Oaks team for setting this up. But before we dive into your presentation, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I've been in the field of aging for over 20 years. It's hard to believe how time flies, and had the privilege of working at different settings, from being a CEO at a senior center, a director in an independent living facility, a day health care center, and an assisted living community. As the Alzheimer's Association's Vice President of Programs and Services, I lead a team that oversees programs throughout Virginia, suburban and Southern Maryland, and the District of Columbia. I want to thank our host, Positive Aging, and Tall Oaks Assisted Living. A special thank you to Leslie and Steve. You have been a pleasure to work with. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duck behind the curtain here. And I think you've got, I got a peek at your PowerPoint. It looks great. You're going to share information, but I want to just remind our audience that this can be interactive. So you can type in your questions, and at the conclusion, you can raise your hand and ask questions verbally. And Anna, just feel free to, if you want to take a break and check in with me, that's totally fine as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for attending the program today. Of all the different aging issues that we experience, forgetfulness is probably the scariest one of all. The number of Americans living with Alzheimer's is growing fast. Over 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's today. Tremendous gains have been made in our understanding of the science and the basic biology underlying Alzheimer's and other dementias. And these advances are leading to great strides in strategies for prevention, detection, diagnostics, and possible therapeutic interventions. During our time today, I'm happy to provide you with an overview of the Alzheimer's disease landscape in the US. As the 6th leading cause of death, we need more research for disease prevention. Today, I will talk about the risk and what we can do to help stave off the disease. I will highlight some of the latest advancements in clinical trials, treatments, and lifestyle interventions that may lower our risk of developing the disease. And as Steve mentioned, we want you to participate in the program. So we're going to be using the chat feature today to engage with you throughout the program. So we want you to open that chat and submit your questions. I will try to answer the questions as I go along. And at the end, we'll have a little bit more time also to answer more questions. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the work of the Alzheimer's Association. This is our mission, to lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementias. And as you can see on this graph, we accomplish this by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction, early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. First, I think I'd like to say that I think that the impact of this disease really hits home for many people. Perhaps you know of someone who has been personally affected by the disease. Many of you may not know about the Alzheimer's enormous impact. The heavy burden of Alzheimer's on individuals, families, and society is growing. 6 million Americans are living with the disease today, and that number is projected to increase to nearly 13 million by the year 2050. This year, Alzheimer's and other dementia is going to cost our nation $257 billion. We track these numbers at the association. We also have data for each of the states. In our national capital area, which includes Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, there are 269,000 people over 65 who have Alzheimer's. And by 2025, that number is expected to reach 329,000. Discrimination is found to be a barrier in Alzheimer's and dementia care. Half of Black Americans, 2 in 5 Native Americans, 1/3 of Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans report that they have experienced discrimination when seeking healthcare. We're often asked, does this disease affect everyone equally? There are disparities in the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and research. Women, African American, and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately affected. Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. We still don't understand the reason for this, but current research suggests that there may be both biological and life experiences that may contribute to this disparity. There are racial and ethnic disparities in the prevalence of the disease too. Older Blacks are 2 times as likely, and Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely as older whites to have Alzheimer's and other dementia. And this prevalence may be driven in these communities by underlying cardiovascular health conditions or factors related to social determinants of health. Historically, ethno-racial groups have been underrepresented in clinical trials and studies, and poor representation of ethno-racial groups means that we really don't have enough representation in these studies to ensure that the results are generalizable to our diverse US population. So simply put it, what we have now is not working. The good news is that there are many efforts underway to develop a new science of recruitment and retention of diverse populations in these clinical trials. People also want to know what the difference is between the terms Alzheimer's and dementia. This is actually one of the most commonly asked questions. The terms are used interchangeably, so it does cause some confusions, but they actually mean different things. Some of you may know more about this already, so I apologize if you're already familiar. Dementia is an overall term for a wide range of symptoms associated with a decline in memory, reasoning, and cognitive skills. It is caused by physical changes in the brain that is usually triggered by a disease like Alzheimer's, a stroke, or an injury like trauma to the brain. And the specific symptoms that someone could experience will depend on the parts of the brain that are damaged and on the disease that is causing the dementia. Dementia means that a person's cognition has declined to a point that it interferes with their activities of daily living. We normally think of cognition as memory, but it also includes thinking and judgment, planning, orientation to time, place, and person. Dementia can also include behavioral and psychological symptoms. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form, accounting for 60 to 80% of all the dementia cases, but there are many forms of dementia. Most of them are quite rare, but as you can see here on this graph, the top 4 causes of dementia or vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal dementia, and mixed dementias. Something that I want you to remember about Alzheimer's dementia is that it is usually accompanied by other brain abnormalities. Sometimes that is something that is forgotten because we use the terminology in various ways, but Alzheimer's dementia is really quite a mix. One of the things that we have learned about this disease is that it occurs slowly. It doesn't start the minute that someone is diagnosed. That underlying biology may have already been at work for 10, 15, 20 years. Researchers now understand that cognitive impairment occurs across a continuum spanning over many years. All of us will move through some phases of normal cognitive aging. That's a natural process, causing some small changes in our cognition over time. But what we're talking about here is really an abnormal process that is driven by disease biology in the brain. We all start cognitively unimpaired, but as we age, some individuals will progress to stages that's called mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment does not interfere with activities of daily living, but mild cognitive impairment is known as a risk factor for dementia. But not all individuals that are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment will go on to develop dementia, but everyone who experiences dementia will have passed through a stage of mild cognitive impairment. So the research community feels that this stage, this mild cognitive impairment stage, provides us with an opportunity for treatment and potential prevention. The idea is that if we can prevent new cases of mild cognitive impairment, we might be able to prevent new cases of dementia. Very interesting information that we're just learning, thanks to all the advancements in research, especially we're learning so much about the underlying biology of this disease. People often ask, what's happening in the brain? What causes the problems with memory, with thinking, some of the behavioral challenges that present themselves from time to time. Alzheimer's dementia is defined by 3 specific hallmark changes in the brain: a buildup of the amyloid proteins in the form of plaques around the outside of neurons, the formation of neurofibrillary tangles inside neurons, and brain cell death or neurodegeneration that causes atrophy of brain tissue in the parts of the brain that are important for memory, planning, and behavior. Researchers today are still very much focused on understanding what causes these biological changes in the brain and how they can use this information to develop new therapies and risk reduction strategies. We often get asked if, what the risk factors are, what causes the disease. People will say, my mother was diagnosed, my grandmother was diagnosed. What are my chances? What can I do to lower my risk? The first question that I ask them is, well, who diagnosed your mother? Who diagnosed your grandmother? Because it really hasn't been until recent years that doctors have had the tools that they need to make a proper diagnosis. So there are many causes and there are many risk factors for the disease. Some of these risk factors cannot be controlled. These are called non-modifiable risk factors. And as you can see on this graph, it includes age, genetics, family history. And when we talk about family history, it's important to note that this is more than just genes. It also includes those shared environmental and life experiences. Another risk factor is race and ethnicity. And in this regard, risk may involve biology, as well as social determinants of health. So these are the factors that we cannot control, but there are some risk factors that we might be able to influence. And as you can see on this graph, it includes cardiovascular disease, education, social and cognitive engagement, diet, exercise, sleep. We will talk more about research regarding these risk factors in a little bit. People also want to hear about the therapies that are out there. They want to learn about these treatment options. So currently, there are several drugs to treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps you're familiar with some of them. These FDA-approved treatments for Alzheimer's help with enhancing cognition. We also know that these types of treatments may only work temporarily. And this is why we need to continue to do more research to develop new treatments that are really going to be able to change the progression of the disease process itself. The good news is that there are many drugs in clinical trials today that are designed to do just that. And this past June, one of those drugs just received accelerated approval. Aducanumab was granted accelerated approval by the Food and Drug Administration. This drug is sold under the brand name Aduhelm. It is the first treatment that addresses the underlying biology of Alzheimer's disease. Aducanumab targets and reduces the amyloid plaques in the brains of individuals with Alzheimer's, which is reasonably likely to lead to a reduction in the clinical decline due to Alzheimer's disease. This treatment was a study in people living with early Alzheimer's dementia and mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, who showed evidence of a buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain. So I just wanted to state that in regards to Aduhelm, it's really meant for individuals who are in the earliest stages of mild cognitive impairment. If you're interested in learning more about this drug to determine if it's appropriate for you or a family member, I urge you to talk to your doctor. It will probably conduct a pre-screening, a complete physical to determine if this type of drug would be a right fit for you or someone in your family. Also wanted to note that Biogen has a website where family caregivers can get additional information about this drug as well. And a quick thing about clinical trials, they're expensive to conduct and take a long time. The process of moving a drug from a laboratory into humans can be more than a decade. And the average R&D, the research and development costs required to bring a new FDA-approved medicine to patients is estimated to be at $2.6 billion over the past decade. That's in 2013 dollars. So you might be wondering, well, what is the Alzheimer's Association doing to accelerate research? That's what we're going to talk about next, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve to see if there's any questions so far.
Okay, and let me take a peek here. Don't hear any questions coming through, which is kind of shocking because you did mention that new drug in your your intro there. So I'm sure I'm certainly interested in hearing more about that, but let's wait till the end of your discussion. This is just a reminder, folks, that you can throw your questions in Q&A and we can address them throughout the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Well, one thing that I did want to bring up is a question that we get asked a lot is why do we see more women diagnosed with Alzheimer's? And it's actually a subject that has been discussed a lot. We used to say that we have more women diagnosed with the disease because they live longer, and advanced age is a risk factor. But now we're wondering if maybe there's something in our biology, maybe there's lifestyle factor. Do our hormones play a role? What about our genetics? What about our life components, such as our sleeping patterns, stress, depression? What role do they play? We don't know. We really need more research. And, I just want to urge folks to really consider participating in clinical trials, because in order for us, the research community, to find effective therapies, we need volunteers to take part in this. We need to remember that 40 years ago, no one knew what the effects of heart disease, how heart disease affected women. Now we know, right? And so we want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. So going back to my presentation here, I asked the question, what is the Alzheimer's Association doing to advance research? And it really starts with efforts like public policy. We share the facts and figures data with the federal government to remind them of how many people have Alzheimer's and the urgency for making sure that research funding increases. Our advocacy recently helped secure $3.2 billion in federal funding for Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease-related dementias. And this graphic actually includes the proposed FY22 funding at $3.4 billion as passed by the House Appropriations Committee. So the government is investing in research, and the Alzheimer's Association is also investing in research. As the world's largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's and dementia research, the Alzheimer's Association has undertaken a multitude of diverse research initiatives. We fund investigations across the spectrum of dementia science. We fund researchers worldwide through our International Research Grant Program. So we fund studies that advance our understanding of Alzheimer's disease, projects that identify new treatment strategies, projects that improve care and support for people living with Alzheimer's and dementia, and projects that further our knowledge of brain health and disease prevention. Today, as you can see here on this graph, the association has more than $250 million of active and committed funding in more than 730 research projects in more than 39 countries, spanning 6 continents. So this is how much the association is investing globally. And on this slide, you can see how much we're investing right here in our region. Locally, we're funding 15 studies. We actually are investing close to $6.5 million just within our region. And we have a strong funding history of local institutions, including the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, Georgetown University, and Johns Hopkins University. So each of these studies and clinical trials teaches us every day. There are new discoveries aimed at detection, diagnosis, treatment, bringing us closer to more effective options. And one of those areas of exciting research is in the areas of biomarkers and early detection tools and technologies. So biomarkers technologies are really changing the game for the field, and the research is moving at a remarkable pace. These tools will change our experiences in the physician's office in many ways in the future, but they are actually already a critical part of how we conduct clinical research studies today, and they're changing the research and the clinical landscape. So biomarkers are simply measures of what is happening inside the living body, shown by the result of laboratory and imaging tests. So for example, an increased level of cholesterol in the blood is a biomarker for heart attack risk. In Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, biomarkers are most often tests of bodily fluids, including blood or cerebral spinal fluid, and neuroimaging scans, such as PET scans, MRI scans, and CAT scans. So biomarkers are invaluable in all aspects of medicine. They allow doctors to diagnose patients, to determine the right treatment plan, and to make sure that the treatment is working. Now, in the research setting, biomarkers are used to enroll the right patients in clinical trials to ensure that the drugs are reaching the intended targets in our body, and to determine that a drug's effectiveness and safety in patients. Biomarkers also enable medical professionals to identify patients that are most at risk for developing a disease. So those patients can take preventative measures. The most sophisticated methods to diagnose Alzheimer's disease measures amyloid and tau. Those are the brain cell proteins that I spoke of earlier in the brain via a PET scan, or in the cerebral spinal fluid via the lumbar puncture. So these tools can be somewhat invasive, expensive, and they're hard to get. So scientists continue to research new kinds of biomarkers that will be lowering costs, non-invasive, and reliable markers of disease. We do need more diagnostic tools, that's for sure. But the good news is that there are many tools that are being developed to support measures of factors in cerebral spinal fluid, blood tests, eye tests, even saliva tests. These will be less expensive tests that would allow doctors to more frequently screen patients for neurodegenerative diseases. Ideally, such tests would identify individuals who are in the earliest stages before they develop the symptoms of dementia. And this would enable both for prevention and for treatment. So this is an exciting area of research. At the Alzheimer's Association's International Conference, both in 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of studies that are looking at, a lot of trials that are looking at identifying biomarkers for the disease. There was a presentation on blood tests for Alzheimer's. There's actually over 20 companies that are looking to develop the next blood test for Alzheimer's. We're not there yet. We need more research, but it's really exciting. For those of you that are interested in keeping up with the research, I invite you to visit us at alc.org/research. So one of the things that we have learned, again, thanks to research, is the way that the field is thinking about this disease today. This is really where we have come really a long way from when we were first diagnosing someone purely on the clinical level, thinking about the dementia syndrome alone. So if you look at this graph on the right side, you have Alzheimer's dementia. So for the longest time, we've been diagnosing people. By the time that we diagnose people, they have already progressed into full Alzheimer's dementia. And what we're really trying to do is move towards this other side of this graph on the left side, towards trying to understand how we can make a diagnosis when the disease is silent. So a lot of the diseases that we have tackled, we have done so because we have gone there earlier and earlier when these diseases were more trackable. So for example, we tried not to diagnose cancers late because the earlier, the better the chances are. We do the same thing with heart disease. We do not want to wait and treat someone until they have had a stroke. Sometimes we have to, but ultimately, if somebody has high blood pressure, you want to treat that so that you can avoid that stroke. The same thing is true with heart attacks. If you have high blood pressure, we want to treat that right before you have that heart attack. The same thing is here. The event is a diagnosis of dementia and maybe even a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. Some clinical trials are actually looking at that. And so our job is really to think about moving from just history. It's important to take a look at the family history. That's true. And we want to, then the cognitive tests, those are the memory tests, to really start moving towards thinking about how we can use biomarkers in disease so that we can detect earlier. But it is this silent phase that you see here in the middle, this preclinical area is really where we really want to be, because this is where we might be able to stop this trajectory from happening, this decline in memory. It would be great if we could do that. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we're going to abandon trying to find medications that are more effective for people that already have dementia, that is not the case. But what is the case is that researchers are starting to explore how we can stop this change from occurring in this preclinical stage. So there's a good number of research that is moving into this area that we call either prevention or secondary prevention, because ultimately you want to avoid the type of decline that you see on the lower right-hand side of the graph in half normal aging. So in the future, treatment for Alzheimer's and other dementias will look a lot like treatment for heart disease does today. It will likely involve a mix of medications and lifestyle changes, both for risk reduction and treatment. It will likely involve a combination of treatments as well. And it's not going to be the same treatment combination for each person. It will really depend on whatever else is going on with the person, because now we know that Alzheimer's rarely occurs by itself. There are usually other comorbidities. So ultimately, it will really be more of personalized medicine and combination therapy. This is great news. We're already using personalized medicine, precision medicine with other diseases. And this is just very exciting. Again, you probably are wondering now, well, what's happening with these trials that are happening right now? Where are we there? Over 300 human clinical trials that are taking place in the United States today. These trials are looking at drugs and devices that are being tested. I also want to know that beyond aducanumab, there are a number of other anti-amyloid treatments that are actually moving to phase 3 clinical trials. The approval of Aduhelm actually opened the door for testing and improving other anti-amyloid-based treatments for Alzheimer's. Researchers are starting to see that as we continue to look at what we call the amyloid cascade, that amyloid promotes the aggregation of tau tangles, which in turn triggers neural death and loss of memory and cognitive ability. We're really starting to see evidence from a number of different clinical trials today that are really pointing to the fact that if we can remove some of that amyloid, we might be able to impact some of that other biology that is causing disease. We're also starting to see drugs that are not anti-amyloid drugs, and they are already moving into phase 3 clinical trials, and more are coming. So this is very exciting, and this has given us hope as well. One of the things that I do want to point out from this graphic is that the total number of participants required for current recruiting trials is over 38,000 people, just for these trials alone. So that means that we need to continue as a community to really drive people towards research. So the two major obstacles in finding effective treatments sooner is one, lack of funding. The Alzheimer's Association's advocates are working on that front. Second, a lack of volunteers for clinical trials is really one of the greatest obstacles slowing the progression of potential new treatments. You can help advance research by getting involved today, by signing up for a clinical trial. And the Alzheimer's Association offers an easy way to find a study that might be a good fit for you or maybe somebody in your family. This service is called Trial Match. It's a clinical trial matching service that can connect you with clinical studies in your area. To learn more about Trial Match, you can visit us at alc.org/trial match, or you can call our 800 number and you can be connected with one of our Trial Match counselors, and they can kind of guide you through the process. So this is really where we need your help. We need to be part of the solution. Signing up for a clinical trial is easy. So please consider that. So we also wanted to talk about some of the many treatments that are under development today. Some treatments aim at changing the underlying biology of the disease, while other treatments are meant to really address the symptoms that's associated with dementia. Both of these treatments are going to be needed in the future as part of an effective treatment strategy. So we need to definitely continue to constantly fill that clinical trial pipeline with innovative strategies for treatment. We know today that Alzheimer's and other dementias are very complex brain diseases, which will likely not be solved by a single drug or treatment approach. So it's critical that we continue to diversify that treatment pipeline. And thanks to our donors, the Alzheimer's Association is able to accelerate research through our Part of the Cloud Translational Research Program. This program is designed to move innovative treatment approaches from the lab through clinical trials and eventually into clinical practice. And what you see here is an example of some of the innovative approaches that are being tested today. We're no longer just targeting the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease in the brain, like the plaques and the amyloid and the tau proteins. These strategies take into consideration the other contributors to dementia biology, such as the brain's immune system, the energy system, and the blood vessels. And the overarching theme of these clinical trials will be cross-cutting mechanisms of neuroinflammation. So before I move to some great news about some interesting studies that are taking place, I'm going to go back to Steve to see if we have any questions.
Okay, well, yeah, we've been getting some questions that have been coming in, and let's see. Okay, I'm just going to read a few of them. You can make the decision to hold off until you're done with your slide deck. But Audra asks, are clinical trials targeting the underrepresented populations? Barbara Blank says, you may have mentioned this, but how large a role does genetics play with dementia, specifically Alzheimer's? And Olivia asks, is there any research on functional medicine or natural supplements reducing the progression of Alzheimer's in individuals?
They're all really very thoughtful questions. Let me address the last one first.
Okay.
My memory bank is not working as good
Okay,
as I would like it to be, so I'll go back to you.
Yeah, the last one is from Olivia, and it says, is there any research on functional medicine or natural supplements reducing the progression of Alzheimer's?
Right. So one of the questions that we get asked a lot by families is, you know, it runs in my family. What can I do? There must be something that I can do. Is there a supplement? Is there a specific diet? No conclusive evidence right now on that, but there's a lot of research, a lot of studies that are happening right now to learn about those kinds of studies. I invite you to visit us at alc.org/trial match, or clinicaltrials.gov is another great website. So for those of you that are interested in keeping up with that type of research, that's a great way, great place to start. A lot of research, nothing conclusive yet. So we do need this rigorous research. I'll be talking shortly about some of the clinical trials that are showing a lot of promise. And a lot of them have to do with lifestyle interventions. So the fact that you're interested in looking at you know, things that you can do, more and more studies are showing that there are things that we can do and be proactive about our overall health. There was the second question. If you can share that with me.
And actually, you addressed the genetics there, and you addressed the homeopathic, and then and I think you're going to talk about clinical trials, and they were just wondering about underrepresented populations.
Oh, so, yes, that's really a good one. When it comes to, I mentioned before, for the clinical trials that are taking place right now, we need over 38,000 volunteers. Across the board, people are not volunteering for clinical trials. And the underrepresented communities, especially women, Black and African American communities and Hispanic Latino communities are not participating in clinical trials. We do need to do better at recruiting, and the Alzheimer's Association, through our study that I'll be talking about shortly, the US Pointer study, one of the initiatives, and we're going really full force on this, is to recruit for that particular study 4,000 folks from diverse communities. And what it takes is going into communities and talking about the importance of research and how we need them to participate, to be part of the solution. And so it's a process, and also educating the community what it means to participate in clinical trials. I should also say that there are a lot of qualifiers for folks to participate in clinical trials, and in some cases, families just, or maybe they don't live close enough, and they, making that trip to the site once a month is hard for them. Maybe it's hard for them to find childcare for their children so that they can take their family members to these trials. So at the association, we're exploring the different types of approaches that we're going to need to put in place to recruit more volunteers to participate in clinical trials. So we actually have 5 sites across the country that will be recruiting for the US Pointer study. This is a lifestyle intervention study, and so we're excited about, and I'll share with you a little bit more about that. The research community knows that they need to do better in recruiting folks from diverse communities, because in underserved communities. Now we know that some of the risk factors that are more common in certain populations, like the APOE4 gene, for example, is one of the risk genes. It is not as much common in the Latino community, for example. So we do need to do more research, but we need more volunteers. And I agree with the person that asked the question. We need to do better. We're not doing good enough. We need to do better. So going back to the program, this is really exciting. This first study that I want to share with you is called the Sprint Mind study. This is a landmark research study that found that aggressive treatment of high blood pressure can reduce the risk of mild cognitive impairment. So in this particular study, investigators were allowed to use blood pressure medications, or they could advocate for changes in diet or exercise to control blood pressure. And the study found that controlling blood pressure to 120 systolic decreased the risk for developing mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And now the study continues as the Sprint Mind 2 study. And this study is going to seek to determine whether this intervention can also reduce the risk of progression into dementia. The Sprint Mind 2 study is going to re-engage the original study participants for 2 additional years of follow-up and assessment to allow for a more definitive statement on the impact on dementia risk. And the Alzheimer's Association, thanks to the generosity of our donors, has accelerated the start of the Sprint Mind 2 study by 1 year with a commitment of $835,000. Proof that lowering blood pressure can lower risk for dementia may be key to improving the lives of millions of people. This type of study tells us that there are things that you and I can do today to reduce our risk of mild cognitive impairment and maybe even dementia. So you heard it before, what's good for the heart is probably good for the brain, right? So therefore, we have an immediate opportunity to be proactive about our cardiovascular health. This is an example of that modifiable risk factors that I was referring to earlier. We're also seeing more and more lifestyle interventions type of studies. So research suggests that combining multiple healthy factors may be the most impactful strategy for delaying the onset of mild cognitive impairment and dementia. Lifestyle interventions to modify the risk of developing mild cognitive impairment and dementia are being actively studied. And some of the strongest research today suggests that controlling cardiovascular risk factors may be helpful in delaying cognitive decline. So cardiovascular risk factors include high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, high mass body index, if you have these conditions, it's important that you manage them to lower your risk for all kinds of complications later in life, and maybe even lower your risk for cognitive impairment later in life. So remember the Sprint Mind study that I talked about earlier? That's another example of these types of interventions. Other healthy factors that may slow cognitive decline include cognitive and social stimulation, a healthy diet, physical activity. This may also improve cardiovascular health. So we do need to continue to learn more about if these approaches actually work, right? More of these studies are needed, but it seems that an ounce of prevention remains the best approach. People who have healthy bodies and well-trained minds are age more gracefully. So keep your body mass under control, keep as social as you can be, and work that brain. Give it a good workout. That seems to still remain a very reasonable and important thing that you can do today. Next, I want to talk about this landmark study that the Alzheimer's Association, this is a 2-year multi-domain lifestyle intervention clinical trial that we're conducting in the US. It's called a US Pointer Study. And this is the first of its kind ever to be conducted in the United States. And it builds on a successful trial that was conducted in Finland that found that a multi-domain lifestyle intervention trial can decrease the risk of cognitive decline in elderly at risk in a Finnish population. So the US Pointer is going to test whether 2 lifestyle interventions, maybe encouraging physical exercise, a healthy diet, cognitive and social activities, and health monitoring, whether that can reduce the risk of memory changes in older adults at an increased risk for cognitive decline. So this is, we're very excited about this study. In addition to the core US Pointer study, additional studies have been funded by NIA to understand whether the impact of these lifestyle interventions on what that has on emerging aspects of the disease. So the Alzheimer's Association is investing $35 million into this landmark clinical trial, and NIH has funded additional studies to look at the impact of sleep, neurovascular contributions, brain scans, and the microbiome, making this a nearly $100 million investment between the Alzheimer's Association and NIA. And more good news to share about this US Pointer study. We're actually part of a global initiative to studying lifestyle and dementia risk. Not only are we leading this exciting lifestyle intervention effort in the United States, the US Pointer study, but we're also bringing the worldwide efforts together through the Worldwide Fingers Network. There are over 25 countries that are participating in similar efforts to see what the effects of these lifestyle interventions might be on the brain health of their populations. The Worldwide Fingers Network was launched in 2017, and it is the first global network of multi-domain lifestyle intervention trials for dementia risk reduction and prevention. Very exciting work that we're taking part in. That's a global effort. All of what you have heard about today really boils down to an effort to change the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. We believe that if we can develop a treatment by 2025, so this could be medicines or through lifestyle interventions that delays the onset of Alzheimer's by just 5 years, then it is projected that 5.7 million people expected to develop Alzheimer's by 2050 would not. Researchers believe that there's enough of these competitors in the race to get at least a few to the finish line in time. So there are a number of late stage trials already in progress. So 2025 is a realistic target in terms of where we are with the science today. Today, I just barely scratched the surface of all the great research and the advancements in research that's taking place. To stay on top of the latest Alzheimer's and dementia research, I invite you to download the Alzheimer's Association's Science Hub. As you can see, very exciting time in research. This is an interesting and transformative time in Alzheimer's research. There are many treatments in the horizon, like some, for example, are focusing on regenerating neurons. There are new tools and technologies that are being developed every day to detect, diagnose disease, and to better understand the brain. There's a company that is actually using artificial intelligence to evaluate people written and spoken words years before they were diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And this has been found to be 75% accurate in predicting those who will go on to develop Alzheimer's. So there's always a reason to be hopeful. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it back to Steve to see if there's any other questions.
Oh yeah, no, we've got a few more that have come through here, but before I read those, as I had mentioned, this new drug is got a lot of media attention, and I think a lot of the media attention was around how expensive it was going to be. Any thoughts on that, or information that you've learned about the cost of this drug, or how that might work when it's and are people using it now? Is it like literally in the consumer marketplace?
Yes. In regards to the price, the cost of this drug, the Alzheimer's Association has been very clear that this is not acceptable. $56,000 a year for the drug, and then there's also imaging tools that one needs to pay for as well. So it's an unfortunate situation. The thing to remember is that this drug is effective. It's for people who are in the earliest stages of mild cognitive impairment. And unfortunately, as we know, the technology is not quite there. The diagnostic tools are not quite there yet to diagnose folks that are at the earliest stages in that stage of mild cognitive impairment. So there's a lot of work that's being done to really get a number of institutions are looking at identifying, developing new tools to make that diagnosed. We know that if we can, diagnose people earlier, the earlier the better, because then we can intervene with medications. And we're talking about a very complex disease. So this particular drug, Aduhelm, will remove the amyloid plaques from the brain. Something to keep in mind is that we're talking about a multifactorial disease that also needs to be considered, as there's other age-related changes in the brain that might also impact someone's risk for developing the disease.
Great, thank you. And it's great to know that Alzheimer's Association is lobbying against those costs, because that was, everybody seemed excited about it, but then when they heard the cost, it was like, oh boy. Okay, and Audra Bakaitis says, is that lowering the risk for cardiovascular dementia or Alzheimer's? This must have been in reference to something that you
that
said.
I said, yes.
Yeah.
So a number of studies have shown that cardiovascular risk factors might put someone at an increased risk for developing cognitive impairment later in life. Again, nothing conclusive, but the big takeaway from that is that, and usually what I tell folks is, take a look at your family history, because there are some medical conditions that run in families, and manage those conditions, be as proactive as you can. I'm Latina, and in the Latino community, we have a higher risk for high cholesterol. It runs in my family. So I try to eat healthier, I try to exercise, try to find ways to relieve stress, trying to make sure that I get enough sleep, because we're hearing now how sleep is important. and all of these other factors are contributing to this. So the big takeaway from this really is take a look at your history, manage your chronic conditions. You'd be surprised how many people will say, you know, I ran out of that thyroid medicine and I'll get it. I'm switching doctors and I'll say, no, you don't understand. That can cause problems with memory, not permanent, but you know, there's a lot of medical conditions that cause problems with memory. So it's important to find out what's causing those symptoms.
Great. And let's see, Audra, your hand is raised. I think you may have, we may have answered your question, but if you've got another question, I've just unmuted you. Audra? Oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, this has been great, very thorough. While I'm pulling up the wheel of names again for our final giveaway, Anna, you were very generous with telling us a lot of great information about a challenging disease, but how can Alzheimer's Association help folks out there, and how can providers connect with Alzheimer's Association? Like, what are some of the resources that we can tap into as a community with the Alzheimer's Association?
Thank you for asking that question. We get a lot of calls at the office from folks that will say to us, my family member was diagnosed and I really don't have many resources. I don't know where to turn for help. I don't know what that first step is. And that's where we come in. We have a 24/7 helpline that's available for families. And we often find that it's really at those off hours, right? Like at midnight when a family member decides that they're going to go to work and the primary caregiver doesn't know how to handle a situation like that, where they can pick up the phone, call the association for support. Locally, our chapter has a team of tremendous program managers who oversee all of our education programs. So we also know that when families learn about the disease, learn about what they can do to really focus on the quality of life, there's a lot that can be done for the person with dementia as well as for the caregiver. So we offer education programs for family caregivers, for the general public. We offer trainings for clinicians as well. On our website, there's an actual a site there that is strictly there for the clinical community where we also provide trainings and CEUs as well. For the public, we also offer support groups and memory cafes and care consultations, and we deliver these programs in English and in Spanish as well. Thank you for asking that question.
Great. Okay, well, let's spin the wheel of names here and let's see who our second winner is. And it looks like it's Belinda Reagan. So Belinda, you win that wonderful gift basket, and I'll make sure to share your contact information, and then we can make arrangements to get that to you. Well, all right. Okay. Anna, would you mind typing your contact information into chat there? There's been a few requests. Oh, and Belinda, I love it when somebody wins and they're on the call. And then Ellen, I'm gonna have Anna type her contact information in there, and we can get that out to everybody. We did record this, so I'll have the recording up later today. Hey there, Crystal. Thanks. I wasn't sure if you were still on the call. I know yes. Things are busy over there at Tall Oaks today. While Anna's typing in her contact information, anything coming up at Tall Oaks that you'd like the audience to know about?
Okay, well, we are currently offering our studio apartments at 4,500 plus level of care. So 4,500 for the month. Market rate on these apartments is almost 6,000 usually. We're also hosting a Halloween contest event for our marketing partners and referral partners, and that'll be on Wednesday, October 27th from 4 to 6 p.m.
Great.
Thank you, everybody that participated, and Leslie, who is not on the call, but thank you for pulling this together for sure.
I love it. And folks, just a reminder, go to proaging.com to check out our upcoming events. And we got a good one tomorrow where we're going to be talking with the author of the book, How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System. So enjoy the day, and we will be talking to you all soon. Thanks, Crystal.
Great.
And thanks,
Steve.
Anna, as
Thanks,
well.
Anna.
You bet.